Hey everybody, my name is Nam, and today I'm going to teach you how to play Shobu. Shobu is a two-player abstract game where you have four boards, and each board has four of your colored stones on it. And the object of the game is to try and push all four of your opponent's stones off of any one of the boards. And you do that through a series of moves. The moves that you can make, each of your turns consists of two moves, one passive move and one aggressive move. Alright, let's take a look. You set up the board like this. Make sure that there are two different colored boards in front of you and two different colored boards in front of your opponent. And feel free to place the rope in between. The board game comes with this. It is purely decorative, but visually appealing. Alright, as we mentioned, the object of the game is to get all four of your opponent's stones off of any one of the four boards. Doesn't matter which one it is, but the instant that you push the last one off, you win. Your first move has to be on one of your home boards, or one of the two boards in front of you. And your first move can only consist of up to two space movements. So let's pretend, the board looked like this. White could not move 3 because 2 is the furthest it could go. It could also go diagonal, and it has to be in a straight line. That's the first restriction. Next restriction is it can't push another stone. So for example, let's pretend all of these black pieces were here. These two pieces could not move at all for the passive move because there's no space for them to move, and they're not allowed to push another stone. So these two would not be allowed to make a passive move. The second move on your turn will consist of an aggressive move, or a move that can push a stone. There's a handful of restrictions, but depending on what you had done for your first initial passive move, let's pretend I took this stone and moved it 2 diagonally in this direction. You must have a piece that can move in that exact same direction and exact same distance on a board of the opposite color. So since this was my passive move, my aggressive move can be on either of the white boards. And in this case, it would have to move in a direction like that, 2 diagonal spaces. So I could move this one 2 spaces like so, because it is a matching move. I could also make a move on this one if I move this as my passive move that way. An interesting rule for this is if your aggressive move happens to push another stone off of the board, it will be removed from the board. So in this case, let's pretend white moves this stone forward. White can move this stone forward 1, and it will push this black stone off of the board. And a couple of things to note. For example, this piece could not make a passive move to this direction, because if it were to do this, there's no other corresponding piece on either whiteboard that could make this aggressive move, and therefore this particular passive move is illegal. Because if we take a look, none of these can move this direction 2 spaces because there aren't enough spaces here, and this one can't move that way because a stone can only push one other stone for your aggressive move. And all of these pieces are aligned. So that would be an illegal passive move. One helpful way to think about this is to try and decide what aggressive move do you want to make, and actually see if there's a passive move that enables that. So let's pretend I wanted to use this stone to push off this opponent by moving 2 in this direction, 1, 2, to push it off this way. That could be achieved because I do have a white stone that could make a similar move, in this case over here. I can make a move on this white board, and then the opposite colored board would be black, and so I'd be able to move that. So in this case, white could move there, and subsequently push this color off. And you rinse and repeat this process until the game is over. One of the things I wanted to share was a couple of games, so let's go take a look at some of those games now. Alright guys, this is the first game that we'll be looking at. So black decides to go first, makes an aggressive move, very tame, but it is, of course, on the opposite board. White goes ahead and aggressively puts themselves in a little bit of danger, but hopefully it pays off depending on what black decides to do. Okay, black decides to do a similar thing. Okay, white starts, and notice how white takes a piece off of the line on white's home board. And black decides to do something similar. Okay, interesting. So white decides to clear a little bit. However, it seems like white does not really care if white loses that one. Notice the little formation that's kind of like a T formation. So it looks like black is hedging their bets. Okay, so now black is getting inside on the white line of the white board on black's home side. Okay, so there's going to be an asserted fight. It looks to be on the black side, black board. And that move looks like it's going to be a positional move. So now black's got to be really careful here. Depending on what black does, it could eventually lead to black's demise. So black decides they have to just get aggressive, and hopefully some of the moves later will pan out. It was also partially a defensive move because on the white home board, it could have possibly been removed. Okay, it looks like that white's okay with this and going to go with a war of attrition. It's okay with sacrificing a white stone to get rid of a black stone, but now threatens on the white home board as well. Now black is threatening win on the white home board of black. Man, there's not an easy way to really talk about the boards on this, is there? Right, that'll push it back. It'll also prevent white from immediately losing. Now I think black is probably in a very tough situation here. And black decides to push up, but believe it or not, that actually is enough to allow white to win. Game. All right, game two. White decides to go in between. White's making a concerted attack on the white side, white home board. And there's a concerted attack on the black side, black home board. That looks to be tightening some moves. Black seems to be playing a little bit defensively. So is white. White pushes forward and isolates black stone. And now black threatens on the black home board. And white wins. All right, this is the final game. So notice how one of the things that these players have done earlier on in the game is if they can get in between two black stones and remove one, or sorry, if they can get in between two opposing stones and remove one, that's actually a really good strategy because stones can't push more than one stone and they can't push their own stone. So it's basically a guaranteed safety spot in that direction. Now remember, just because you see a stone that you can remove does not mean that that stone is the one that needs to be removed immediately. You may have to take your time to plan appropriately. Might actually be more important to kind of force your opponent to do certain moves earlier rather than just taking a piece. So if there's some moves that you can see that you can make multiple threats on. So for example, it puts something in position for a following threat and also immediately threatens another piece. Trying to use your moves efficiently is really good. So black knows black is pretty safe on the white homeboard at the moment because black was in between two white stones. But white's trying to open that up right now. Black knows that the range of each stone is only two, so this is a non-threatening situation. Also, there weren't any moves to immediately get it off anyway, even if three was not a limit. So now there's multiple threats and multiple boards. And also seeing that going in a diagonal direction that way is not easy for white because of how all of the white stones are kind of aligned on the white homeboard at the moment. So now take a look at the black homeboard of white. White's black homeboard, and all of the white stones are all up against the edge. So movement options are going to be a little tight over there. And almost in a similar boat, like moving in the, from I guess the camera's perspective, in the upward direction is pretty much the only option. But moving in the downward direction from how we're looking at it is probably not going to be possible for white. So now trying to go in for the kill. White threatens game on the white home board. And so now, if you take a look at the situation's pretty dire because black has to move the one black on the black home board to move the white. So what black came up with was actually blocking the passive move. So that was brilliant. Moving the black piece on the white home board to block movement on the white black home board to not allow immediate death. Now white just has to bide time. But white just cleared another path for victory because now white has the option on the black home board to do the passive and then the aggressive on the white home board to push off the final. And black can't actually move the black stone in a similar manner to block. The players are talking. Full disclosure, the players are my wife and me. So I believe this is game because I don't think black has a way to get out of it without putting another stone in danger potentially. Yeah, that was a concession move. Game. Okay, let's talk about strategy. Okay, so a couple of things. At face value, the immediate plays are just try and threaten your opponent and push them off of certain boards. A couple of things that you have to keep in mind. Remember, your opponent is trying to do the same thing, so make sure that you try and notice when your opponent is starting to isolate specific boards so that you can't act on those. One way to disrupt your opponent is, remember, their passive move is what dictates their aggressive move. So if you actually see an aggressive move that you don't like, and there's actually fewer stones on the board, maybe instead of running, the easiest thing to do, especially later when you have fewer pieces and you have limited movement options, is to try and actually use your stones to block the passive moves of your opponent that you don't want them to make. One thing that you'll notice as you start playing the game and pieces are removed from each of the boards is that your movement options are going to be highly limited as the game progresses because there's going to be stones removed from every board. And remember, since you're restricted to moving on your home boards first, it behooves you to try and keep some options on each of your home boards so that you can actually have the options to move on the aggressive boards. Another thing to note is, remember, you can use one of your passive moves on your home boards, but if you also use your aggressive move on your other home board, remember that you're not going to be getting too much movement on the opponent's side of the table, and thus you might not have too many options to defend yourself if that's where they're being aggressive. And so this is kind of a balance, like a back and forth. Make sure sometimes you do some moves that are necessary near on the boards closest to you, and sometimes you do moves that are further away. Sometimes I've actually found that if you try and be aggressive on the opposite boards, that actually makes life easier because it will limit their movement options later. And sometimes it's just easier to calculate because there's just fewer pieces to look at. Another thing that I've noticed is after playing a bunch of games, when you have certain pieces move in a bunch of directions, if you have a lot of pieces in one corner of a board, either if it's like all the way on the left or the right, you don't have many movement options going that way. So make sure that you try and balance pieces so that you have multiple movement options on each board. Overall, I feel like Shobu is a very simply designed game, but it's very complex as far as like how you can think about things, the options that you have. But anyway, that is Shobu. Hopefully you guys found this useful and interesting, and hopefully you enjoyed. Other than that, you guys have a glorious day, and we'll talk to you guys later. See ya. A couple of things you do have to keep in mental checks. And white can't actually, sorry, black gets in the grill. On the white home whiteboard, adds to the style, whatever else you want to consider. I've said movement options so many times this entire video, I don't even know what else to say.